Everyone has been asking the same question for months, leaving endless comments, sending private messages, and picking apart every single frame of old red carpet footage just to figure out why Wang Yibo suddenly created an invisible wall between himself and Xiao Zhan. The rumors have been absolute chaos, ranging from secret behind-the-scenes rivalries to huge corporate contract disputes that supposedly tore their friendship apart. But when you look at how it actually went down from the inside, the reality isn't a grand cinematic betrayal or a massive public blowout. It is something far more grounded, deeply personal, and honestly a bit heartbreaking. If you have been following this situation and wondering why two people who used to be completely inseparable suddenly started acting like total strangers in the exact same room, you need to pull up a chair, sit tight, and clear your mind of everything you think you already know. The actual truth behind why Yibo decided to completely cut ties is finally coming to light, and it is a lot more complicated than any online gossip thread has ever made it out to be. To really understand how we got to this point of total silence, you have to throw out the dramatic fan fiction and look at how these two actually operate as human beings when the cameras are turned off. Back when they were filming together, the chemistry wasn't just a clever marketing trick cooked up by a production studio. They were genuinely close, leaning on each other during grueling 16-hour shooting schedules, sharing inside jokes, and navigating the overwhelming pressure of sudden, global stardom side by side. They formed an unspoken bond because, at that specific time in their lives, nobody else on the planet quite understood what they were going through. But that kind of intense closeness comes with a major catch. When you let someone that far into your inner circle, the boundary line between your professional career and your personal life completely dissolves. You stop seeing each other as colleagues and start trusting each other with your real vulnerabilities, your actual fears, and the things you never say in public interviews. And that is precisely where the foundation started to develop its very first cracks. The trouble didn't start with a big explosive fight on a set or a dramatic argument behind closed doors during an awards show. It started with a series of tiny, almost imperceptible shifts in how their respective teams handled the massive media storm surrounding them. As their popularity exploded into something almost unmanageable, the environment around them transformed into a high-stakes pressure cooker. Yibo has always been a straightforward, no-nonsense guy. He is the type of person who values direct communication above everything else, prefers to keep his private life completely locked down, and handles conflict by addressing it immediately or stepping away entirely. Xiao Zhan, on the other hand, lives under a completely different kind of public magnifying glass, surrounded by a massive corporate machine and a fan base that reacts to every single micro-movement he makes. When the external drama began to spill over into their actual lives, the way both of them handled the incoming pressure was fundamentally incompatible. Industry insiders who were present during that crucial transition period recall a very specific shift in energy that happened behind the scenes long before the general public caught on. It started during a period when the online noise surrounding both actors hit a fever pitch. Rather than presenting a unified front or having an open, direct conversation about how to navigate the storm together, the communication channels between their camps began to freeze up. Yibo reached out directly, expecting a candid, one-on-one conversation between friends who had survived the trenches together. He wanted to clear the air, align their boundaries, and ensure that their personal dynamic wasn't being manipulated by outside forces, media strategists, or fan wars. But instead of getting that raw, direct honesty he expected, he was met with standard PR deflection, delayed responses, and a wall of corporate caution. For someone like Yibo, who views loyalty as an absolute, non-negotiable standard rather than a business strategy, that hesitation felt less like professional management and more like a personal detachment. That moment marked the initial fracture. But what happened next is what truly sealed the deal. As the online scrutiny intensified, subtle moves were made behind the scenes to protect individual brands and manage public perception. Statements were issued, subtle social media adjustments were made, and management teams began quietly distancing the two stars to protect commercial endorsements and project opportunities. While Xiao Zhan was navigating an incredibly complex, high-pressure situation with his own team advising him to keep a low profile and avoid making waves, Yibo interpreted the deliberate silence as a choice. To Yibo, friendship isn't something you put on pause when the public relations weather gets rough. He felt that while he was standing firm and protecting the dynamic they built, the other side was playing a calculated game of self-preservation. It wasn't about malice or intentional harm. It was a fundamental clash of values under extreme pressure. People who know Yibo well know that he doesn't throw public tantrums, he doesn't post cryptic messages online, and he certainly doesn't drag personal drama into the public eye for attention. When he decides that a relationship has lost its core trust, he simply closes the door, quietly, permanently, and completely. He doesn't leave room for back-and-forth arguments or passive-aggressive media leaks. He just steps back and removes himself from the equation entirely. That is exactly what happened when he made the internal decision to cut off direct contact. It wasn't done out of anger or petty revenge. It was done out of self-protection and a deep disappointment that the mutual trust they once shared had been compromised by corporate maneuvering and unaddressed misunderstandings. When you rewatch old events from that specific period with this context in mind, the famous awkward interactions suddenly make complete sense. Remember that high-profile evening event where both of them were seated just a few rows apart, yet neither made eye contact or acknowledged the other's presence. Fans spent weeks arguing over whether it was just a strict safety protocol, a direct order from their agencies, or pure coincidence. The truth was far simpler and much colder. By that night, The decision had already been made. Yibo had completely drawn his line in the sand. He wasn't avoiding Xiao Zhan because he was told to by a publicist. He was ignoring the situation because, in his mind, the genuine connection was already over, and he refused to pretend otherwise just to give the media a fake, polite photo opportunity. What makes this situation so intensely captivating to anyone watching from the outside is how relatable the underlying human dynamic actually is. Strip away the millions of dollars, the designer clothing, the massive endorsement deals, and the screaming fans, and what you are left with is a basic story of two friends who drifted apart under the weight of unsaid words and misaligned priorities. One person expected absolute, unfiltered loyalty, regardless of the professional cost, while the other was caught in a massive network of corporate obligations, strategic PR advice, and immense external pressure that made direct, unfiltered action almost impossible. By the time either of them realized how far apart they had grown, the wall between them was already too high to climb over. In the months following the initial quiet split, there were several subtle attempts made by mutual acquaintances in the industry to build a bridge and bring them back into the same room. Producers who knew the massive commercial power of seeing them together tried to organize joint appearances, quiet dinners, and shared project pitched under the guise of casual reunions. But Yibo remained completely immovable. Once he draws a personal boundary, he does not erase it for the sake of convenience or commercial gain. He made it crystal clear to his inner team that any project involving shared personal space or forced public interactions was off the table. He was moving forward with his career, focusing entirely on his racing, his gritty film roles, and his own independent creative path, leaving that entire chapter firmly locked in the past. Xiao Zhan, meanwhile, continued to build his own massive career trajectory, taking on heavy dramatic roles and establishing himself as an absolute powerhouse in the entertainment sphere. But those close to the circle mentioned that the silence between them left a lingering, quiet awkwardness whenever their paths inevitably crossed through shared directors, producers, or industry events. It wasn't an active feud full of hatred. It was the uncomfortable, heavy quiet that exists between two people who used to know everything about each other and now know absolutely nothing about who the other person has become. They had both survived the intense storm that made them famous, but they had come out on the other side as completely different people who no longer fit into each other's worlds. When you look at Yibo's honest reaction to the entire ordeal today, there is no bitterness left, nor is there any desire to revisit the drama. His reaction wasn't a sudden, fiery outburst. It was a calm, decisive exit. He realized that holding on to a relationship that required constant performance, corporate filtering, and walking on eggshells was exhausting and fake. By cutting off the line, he regained complete control over his own space and peace of mind. The initial silence that settled between them was supposed to be the end of the story, a clean break that allowed both of them to move forward in their own separate lanes without any further distraction. But in the ultra-magnified universe of top-tier celebrity culture, a clean break is almost an illusion. When two massive stars who once shared the center of the entertainment world decide to completely stop existing to one another, the silence itself becomes a living, breathing entity. It creates a vacuum, and in the entertainment industry, a vacuum is always filled with relentless pressure, subtle power plays, and continuous tests of resolve. What happened in the months following that initial, decisive cutoff wasn't a sudden, dramatic reunion or a loud public confrontation, but rather a quiet, high-stakes game of territorial boundaries and mutual avoidance that tested just how firm Yibo's stance truly was. Industry insiders who operate in the high-end commercial sector began to notice the ripple effects almost immediately. Major luxury brands, high-profile fashion houses, and elite production studios suddenly found themselves walking on eggshells. For years, booking either actor meant navigating complex fanbase dynamics, but now, talent managers and event coordinators had to implement an unwritten, highly strict protocol. If one was confirmed for an event, the other's team had to be discreetly notified so scheduling could be arranged down to the exact minute. Red carpets were timed so that their arrival windows never overlapped. Private holding rooms were assigned on opposite ends of venues, and backstage security personnel were quietly instructed to ensure their paths never crossed in narrow hallways. It was a massive, delicate logistical dance happening entirely behind the curtain, all designed to maintain the absolute boundary that Yibo had set in stone. Yet, despite all the careful planning, the industry is small at the very top, and an inevitable near miss occurred at a private, invitation-only dinner hosted by a prominent film director in Shanghai. The event was intimate, designed for top-tier actors, producers, and investors to mingle away from the relentless glare of cameras and fans. Xiao Zhan had arrived early, engaging in quiet, polite conversation with several veteran filmmakers in a corner of the private lounge. Unbeknownst to most in the room, Yibo had been invited by the director himself, who naively believed that the passage of time and an intimate setting with heavy-hitting industry elders might naturally soften the tension and force a polite, civil interaction. When Yibo stepped through the heavy double doors of the private dining room, accompanied by his close manager, the room underwent an instant, palpable drop in temperature. It was one of those rare moments where the public mask slips for just a fraction of a second. Xiao Zhan paused mid-sentence, his gaze shifting toward the entrance, while several producers subtly braced themselves for what felt like an impending collision. But what happened next showcased the exact, unwavering mindset that led to the cutoff in the first place. Yibo didn't look flustered. He didn't show a flash of anger, and he certainly didn't make a scene. He scanned the room with a calm, completely unbothered expression, acknowledged the host with a brief, respectful nod, and walked straight over to a group of action directors near the opposite end of the space. For the next 2 hours, the room existed in 2 completely distinct hemispheres. Xiao Zhan remained composed, performing the expected social duties of a top actor with flawless charm, while Yibo kept his conversation strictly focused on upcoming film projects, motorcycle testing, and technical stunt choreography. They were standing less than 30 feet apart, breathing the same air, surrounded by the most powerful people in Chinese cinema, yet Yibo built an invisible, impenetrable fortress around his personal space. He didn't cast side glances, he didn't adjust his posture to project dominance, and he didn't attempt to leave early to avoid awkwardness. He simply treated the space occupied by his former friend as completely vacant. It was a masterclass in emotional detachment, a clear, living demonstration that when Yibo decides someone no longer belongs in his inner life, that person ceases to exist in his personal reality altogether. That night sent a loud, clear message through the upper echelons of the industry. Up until that point, many executives believed that the icy distance was largely a PR maneuver cooked up by rival management teams to keep their individual brands distinct and commercially lucrative. But seeing Yibo's absolute, unwavering demeanor in a private, camera-free setting made everyone realize the truth. This was not a corporate strategy. It was a deeply personal, permanent choice made by a man who values authenticity above all else. There was no theatrical bitterness to exploit, no lingering resentment to manipulate into a dramatic storyline, and no hidden desire for a grand reconciliation. There was only a quiet, absolute boundary that no amount of industry prestige or social pressure could bend. In the weeks following that private encounter, subtle shifts began to occur in how both camps operated. The management teams stopped trying to quietly test the waters for future joint ventures or nostalgic brand crossovers. The realization had finally set in across the board that the bridge wasn't just burned, it had been completely cleared away. Xiao Zhan's team focused even more intensely on solidifying his position as a serious, classic dramatic actor, steering clear of any commercial or creative spaces that had even a remote connection to Yibo's domain. Meanwhile, Yibo doubled down on his intense, uncompromising lifestyle, pouring his energy into high-risk physical roles, competitive motorsports, and projects that demanded raw, unvarnished discipline. What makes this ongoing dynamic so intensely fascinating to watch unfold over time is how it highlights the total contrast in how 2 high-profile human beings handle the heavy price of fame. One adapted to the system, learning to navigate its complex web of public diplomacy, protective silence, and corporate strategy. The other looked at the system, decided that its demands had cost him a genuine personal bond, and chose to strip away the pretense entirely. Yibo's decision to maintain that wall isn't about holding a grudge or nursing old wounds from the past. It is about protecting his own integrity in an industry that constantly asks people to fake smiles, pretend relationships are fine for the sake of publicity, and play along for the camera. As the months continue to stack up, the public speculation still flares up occasionally whenever an old clip resurfaces or a shared brand contract comes up for renewal. But for those who truly understand what happened behind the scenes, the story has reached its ultimate, realistic rhythm. There are no secret, late-night phone calls, no hidden messages coded into social media posts, and no quiet longing for things to go back to the way they were during those early filming days. The door remains firmly, quietly shut. Yibo proved that when he cuts ties, he doesn't do it as a cry for attention or a tactic to get an apology.